Imagine this. You're walking in the woods. Before setting off, the friend who is walking with you tells you that there has been no one in these woods before you two. You two are the only people ever to have entered these woods. And he is certain about this. He is for sure you are the first two people to ever be in these woods. You and your friend hike a little bit into the woods, and after a while something catches your eye. You notice words inscribed on the bark of a tree. You go a little bit off the path and you check out these words and you read them. To your surprise, what's written on the tree is a joke. And not only is it a joke written on the tree, it's actually kind of funny. Your friend takes a look at it and he says, "That's not possible. There's never been anyone in these woods before." He says that, well, some natural process must have eroded the tree. Surely, with enough time and enough wind and water acting on these trees, that surely somewhere, at some point, there'll be a knock-knock joke inscribed on one of them, right? After all, again, there's never been anyone in these woods before. Do you believe him? This situation is very much analogous to the situation that evolutionary biologists find themselves in. Many scientists today hold to a theory known as abiogenesis. This theory states that life, as we know it, arose purely through natural processes. Non-life chemicals slowly and incrementally changed enough to where they could be considered life molecules. And that's how we all got here. The theory that in the past has dominated our thought about how we got here is known as creationism. Creationism is the belief that the universe and everything in it, including life, was all created by a transcendent being. The most prominent example in our Western world of this is the Christian story of creation, found in Genesis chapter 1. The conflict between the theories of abiogenesis and creationism have been around for decades now. But which one is really the correct theory? According to most modern-day scientists, abiogenesis is the more rational and proven theory of how we got here. But is that correct? Has the creationism hypothesis really been totally disproven? And is the abiogenesis theory really as sure as most scientists make it sound? As it turns out, no. Abiogenesis is a theory that is full of contradictions, paradoxes, and problems that scientists have yet to overcome. Additionally, the theory of creationism has yet to die out. I propose that despite all the amazing scientific advancements and discoveries of the 20th and 21st centuries, creationism is still a valid hypothesis for how we got here, and it should be treated with respect by evolutionary biologists and scholars in general. Before I build my case for this, let's quickly clarify what I mean when I say creationism. In this video, I will be focusing particularly on Christian creationism, because I believe that is the more well-defended hypothesis. Within Christian creationism, there are two main schools of thought. Ultimately, what divides these two schools of thought are how they interpret Genesis chapter 1. The first group is called the Young Earth Creationists. Young Earth Creationism teaches that the entire universe, all the life, all the matter, everything, came into existence in 1 week. They interpret the story in Genesis chapter 1 entirely literally. For those of you who aren't familiar, Genesis chapter 1 talks about the creation of the universe. Creation is divided into 6 days. On each day, God created some other aspect of creation. On day 1, he creates light. Another day, he creates land. Another day, he creates birds and fish. Another day, animals. Another day, people. And the Bible says that on the 7th day, God rested. As previously stated, Young Earth Creationists take this story to be entirely literal. This view is promoted by several organizations, including Answers in Genesis. After that, Genesis talks about Adam and Eve and their descendants all the way to Noah. Using these fairly detailed genealogies found in Genesis, Young Earth Creationists typically estimate the Earth to be about 6,000 years old, which is a far cry from the 4.5 billion years that scientists today estimate the Earth is. Now, at first glance, Genesis chapter 1 really seems to support this, but this view conflicts with a lot of scientific evidence, including radiometric dating of rocks, the counting of tree rings, measurements about the expansion rate of the universe, and lots of other measurements, including measuring distant starlight from stars that no longer exist. A lot of young Earth apologetics really consists of casting doubt on all these scientific measurements. They typically say that they're based on assumptions that are totally unproven. In contrast, Old Earth creationism takes this evidence as it is. Old Earth creationists typically believe that the story in Genesis chapter 1 is not a literal telling of what happened. Instead, they see it as an allegory or a metaphor for how creationism really happened. One of the biggest points of disagreement between Young and Old Earth creationists is how they interpret the word day in Genesis chapter 1. Young Earth creationists say it says day, it means a literal day, a literal 24-hour period. Old Earth creationists take it to mean a period of time. The Hebrew word, which I'm not going to try to pronounce because I don't know how, can actually be understood either way. In some verses, it means a metaphorical day. In other verses, a literal day. I really like what Wayne Grudem, a professor at the Phoenix Seminary, writes about it. He says that the Bible doesn't really tell us whether the creation happened over a period of 6 days or billions of years. Then, of course, the common objection is, well, why is it written the way that it is? Why is it written like it's a literal week? But it makes sense why it would be written this way when you consider the audience it was written for. Genesis was written a long, long time ago. We today, who are used to reading scientific textbooks and very detailed historical accounts, aren't really familiar with this type of writing. This was written for the Israelites as they were just founding their nation, and for an audience like that, it makes sense to write it that way. It's a much more easily digestible and clear way of understanding creation. It also sets a precedent for the Jewish tradition of not working on the Sabbath or the seventh day, just like how God rested on the seventh day in the creation story. So if the Bible can support either a young or old Earth, how do we make the call? In this case, I really think it's rational to defer to the scientific opinion of 4.5 billion years for the Earth and roughly 13 billion for the universe. With all the ambiguity around Genesis chapter 1, I think it makes sense to go with that number. Now that we know exactly what we're defending, let's talk about how creationism stacks up against modern scientific theories about how the universe and life came to be. My goal here isn't really to show that creationism is more rational or more supported by evidence, but rather just to show that it's just as valid a hypothesis as the modern ones are, the ones that try to explain everything through purely natural processes. The most common school of thought when it comes to the beginning of the universe is what's called the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory states that roughly 13.8 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe exploded into existence from a single point. This hypothesis is backed up by things like the cosmic background radiation, which is measured in space, which is a remnant of the energy that was created during that Big Bang, and the expansion of the universe. If the universe is expanding, that means that it once had to be much smaller. If you extrapolate that out, then logically it makes sense that it was once just a single point. Like I said, this is accepted by the majority of scientists today. It fits into what we call the standard cosmological model. And it doesn't really contradict creationism. Creationism also teaches that the universe has a beginning. It seems that science just has told us a little more about what that beginning was like. But let's talk about life for a minute. Let's think back to our example with the tree and the joke carved on the tree. Again, your friend insists that there has been no one in these woods before. This is similar to the materialistic thinking that before life on Earth started, there was no life, and there was no intelligent forces acting upon anything. But again, how did that joke get there? The joke in this analogy is a representative of DNA. Inside your cells, and in the cells of every living thing, there's DNA. DNA encodes information in your cells. And it's not just random information, it is very specific and complex information. This information is used by proteins to make more proteins. DNA, just like the joke, has to be very meticulously encoded. And the code within DNA has to work together with other codes within DNA, just like how words in the joke have to work together with other words in order to actually produce a funny joke. So, how did something this complex happen by accident? Well, like your friend said, given enough time, surely we should find, or even expect to find, molecules like DNA encoding information. And then, of course, the most fit DNA just outcompetes the rest of it. All the other ones fall apart while this one continues to replicate. Right? The problem is that time is not going to help. Unless you already have systems of proteins in place to preserve the DNA and fix mutations or any errors in replication, the DNA will just die out or dissolve or just fall apart. We all know this intuitively. If a living organism dies, all of its information, all of its cellular structure slowly begins to break down. There have been some experiments done to show that biological molecules can arise purely by chance just from natural processes. Stanley Miller's famous experiment showed that using the atmosphere that was thought to be on a prebiotic Earth, amino acids will form when an electric current is run through it. But this experiment doesn't really prove more than when the ingredients for amino acids are present and you introduce energy, amino acids form. Plus, the conditions that Miller used to create this outcome were incredibly specific and very unlikely to be found on a prebiotic Earth. Not to mention that just amino acids aren't enough to get you life. Life is made up of all sorts of molecules. Amino acids are just one of those. But hey, after enough time, maybe there'll be more and more amino acids. Maybe DNA will very slowly just start to form. Again, time doesn't really help. Let's say that you have a small strand of DNA that forms by chance on a prebiotic Earth. And then another billion years later, oh, look at that, you have more. Well, in those billion years, that first strand is already going to be broken down. Again, there's nothing to keep it from just falling apart. On top of that, the proteins that are needed to keep the DNA in shape, well, those are encoded for in DNA. You end up with this paradox where you need proteins for the DNA to exist, but you need DNA for the proteins to exist. It just doesn't work. There are all sorts of other paradoxes and contradictions within this theory. Stephen A. Brenner does a really good job of documenting these in his paper. So if abiogenesis is so far from being proven, then why is it commonly thought of as the best explanation for how we got here by scientists? Surely they should recognize how impossible it sounds and give up on it, right? Well, the truth is, they can't. These scientists, they're not malicious. They're not trying to deceive you. They're really trying to find the truth. It seems that scientists hold to this theory for the same reason that creationists hold to their theories. It's a matter of faith. Materialistic atheists believe that there's nothing but physical matter. So in their thinking, only physical matter and natural processes could have produced life. They're starting an experiment with the end goal already made up. They'll accept no other explanation because, well, their presuppositions don't allow them to. And it seems like a lot of them are totally blind to this bias. Well, they, ironically enough, accuse creationists of being biased. Materialists have to believe that life came through natural processes because that's the only scenario that their worldview allows for. One clear example of this bias shows up in a paper by Sara Walker and Paul Davies. In their paper, The Hard Problem of Life, they write this: if one insists on attributing the pathway from mundane chemistry as the outcome of fixed dynamical laws, then our analysis suggests those laws must be selected with extraordinary care and precision, which is tantamount to intelligent design. It states that life is written into the laws of physics. They follow that up by saying, there is no evidence at all that the actual known laws of physics possess this almost miraculous property. Walker and Davies then go on to make a case that maybe the laws of physics were different back then. Maybe there was some law that allowed information to act on physical matter. But in response to this, I'm going to just repeat their words right back to them. There is no evidence that the actual known laws of physics possess this almost miraculous property. Unfortunately, this topic is rife with ambiguity. None of us were there when the universe or life was created or came into being, so we can't really say for sure. But that doesn't mean we should give up on trying to figure it out. I just hope that in the future, biologists and physicists recognize their bias. And I hope that they give the hypothesis of creationism the respect that it deserves.